Well, I mean, you just look at the soundtrack of, all of these songs that you created yourself. Big Girls Don't Cry, Walk Like a Man, Dawn, Go
Yeah.
Away, Ragdoll. Did they all come like in 15 minutes?
No.
Was there
Some
some
of them
hard
were
work?
torture.
Yeah.
Ragdoll in particular was inspired by, I think it's 10th or 11th Avenue in New York. They have what I consider the world's longest light. It lasted probably 3 minutes or so. So if you got stuck there, which I did one morning going to the studio, you'd have to wait it out, and I happened to be first in line. And traditionally there were, the have-nots who would be standing on the corners, and they'd clean your windows and try and get a quarter or something, and trying to survive. And this one morning, I saw this tiny little hand, barely reach the window, and start cleaning it. And I looked down, and there was the Ragdoll. I mean, she couldn't have been more than 8 years old, and dirty face and tattered clothes, and it just stayed with me. I reached in my pocket to give her some change, and I had like a $10 bill. And I thought for a second. But I said, how can I possibly not give her something, So I gave her the $10 bill, and the horns were beeping now, because I was mesmerized by this face. And the horns were beeping, and I started to pull away, but I could see in the rearview mirror, she stood in the middle of the street with the $10 bill, just stunned, and finally she moved out of the way. And that stayed with me, and that was Ragdoll. But that was the initial inspiration, but it took like 3 weeks to finish the last line of the song.
Really?
I mean, it was and now that I look at it and say, why was that so difficult? But, it's just the process. Sometimes it works easy, it's quick, and sometimes it's grueling.
Yeah. What about Big Girls Don't Cry? Hard or easy?
That was a little easier than Ragdoll, but still, probably because the pressure of having Sherry, which was a huge record, 6 or 7 weeks at number one, and having to follow it up, we started to get the sweats. So we labored on that one for a while too. So I think primarily pressure was the reason.
And then, like, the Four Seasons sort of stopped being Frankie was doing the solo thing. Can't Take My Eyes Off of You was your song as well, but a solo hit for Frankie.
Mm-hmm. Well, Frankie, and we knew no one really had a clue at what his versatility was, so that was a big plus. But both Bob and I knew that he just couldn't spend the rest of his career singing falsetto on top of harmony parts. So we knew he did want to do a solo. He and his love was always a little bit to the jazz side of things. And one of my great loves was Stan Kenton Band. So hence the horn solo in the middle and the sound of it. So we plotted to do a solo with Frankie. And it was a difficult thing because we thought we had a great record, but the record company, for lots of reasons, and I suspect now thinking about it, primarily because they were afraid if he did have a hit as a single, it would be the end of the Four Seasons. So they weren't really up for this. And they thought that it was just not a pop record at the time, and probably not, because it was a little too romantic, a little too middle of the road, but yet it had this heavy drum rhythm track. So we kind of were in the middle of nowhere. So it was a very difficult time to try and get it accomplished. But no matter how much we assured the record company, Frankie's not leaving the group. This is just another side of Frankie. This is, he should be allowed to stretch out, because he can. And we can write something beyond what we've been writing. But it was a battle. It was a battle from the beginning.
But if anything, I mean, you were the one that had the work outside the group. Silence is Golden came along. The Tremolos hit.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we had successes. Sun Ain't Gonna Shine, even though first recorded by Frankie, turned out to be the big record by the Walker Brothers. And we had successes because there were just some things I guess we didn't think worked as well for us, like Silence is Golden. We recorded it first, but I think it was a B-side, and the Tremolos came along, fortunately, and covered it, and it was great.
And then came along the concept album, The Genuine Imitation Life Gazette.
Yes, which I still have nightmares about. I've always felt responsible for the successes and the failures. I've always put that burden on my shoulders, and when the Gazette album came along, it was a disaster from that standpoint. I still think it was one of the better things I've been involved with as a writer and a producer, but it was a humongous flop by our standards. So that was a tough time. No one's ever, Frankie or anyone else, said that was the beginning of the slide, and it's your responsibility, and you put us there. But I feel that way. I felt that way from that time. So I kind of plotted to find ways to reverse that years after. But it was a tough time.
Was that because of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper and Beach Boys' Pet Sounds?
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, they were both brilliant albums, and I was certainly influenced by them. And so I don't know. I guess influence is enough. It put me in a place that I thought we should do more than just make pop records and do an album. We never considered ourselves an album-oriented group. We would go in and make records and singles, and if they were good enough, they'd go in an album. But it wasn't concept or let's tackle this with a bigger picture in mind. So yeah, in that respect, I think we were the first ones. In fact, I know we were the first ones to do that concept with the cover and the artwork and the whole thing, because Jethro Tull came along with Thick as a Brick and pretty much emulated what we did. So, I mean, there was some sense of, hey, somebody got it. In fact, I had dinner with John Lennon years after, and it was interesting because he was wonderful to just general conversation, a real straight shooter guy. And he said after a couple of drinks, probably why, but he said, that Genuine Imitation live album you guys made, that was one of my favorite albums. I play it all the time. And I thought, well, I guess it was worth making.
Yeah. Well, he sort of copied the cover, didn't he, when he did Sometime in New York City?
Yeah. So it wasn't a huge success by our standards, but it was certainly a worthwhile project.